The sound of a metal spoon hitting the edge of a tray rang out sharply amidst the noisy atmosphere of the canteen, sharp enough to cut through all the surrounding conversations. A woman standing behind the counter was trembling with anger, while the person opposite her just stood still, two hands tightly gripping the edge of the tray, as if it were the only remaining point of support. "This food is not for you." Her voice stressed every word, the soup spoon raised, pointing directly at the girl's face. A streak of red sauce splashed out, spreading on the white shirt background like a newly torn wound. The girl did not reply, not because she had nothing to say, but because she had learned how to swallow down words like these a very long time ago. Right at that moment, the glass door behind her back burst open. A tall man, in a neat suit, was stepping in mid-sentence with two security guards walking alongside. He stopped short. His gaze was glued to the red sauce streak on that white shirt. "Say it again." His voice was deep, slow, not loud at all, but enough to make the whole canteen fall dead silent in a split second. 3 hours ago, he was still sitting in the oak wood meeting room, signing under the blueprint of the research center named after his late wife. No one, including him, expected this noon would end here. If you want to know who that man really is, stay with me until the end of this story. It also will not take up too much of your time. Just one click to follow the channel, so that next time the next story will find you by itself, without having to go searching again. Xavier Bennett grew up in an old apartment complex on the edge of the city, where the sound of ambulance sirens rang out more often than church bells. His family's 3-room apartment was located on the 3rd floor, the windows looking out over a pothole-filled parking lot, and every winter, the cold air seeping through the window. Cracks caused the whole family to wrap in blankets, sitting close together in the living room to save heating money. His father worked maintenance at a large hospital in the city for nearly 30 years, while his mother was a night shift nurse in the emergency room of that exact hospital. They were rarely present at home at the same time, but every Friday evening, the whole family would sit around the rickety wooden table, eating a simple stew and talking until the clock struck 10. Xavier's younger brother, Malcolm, 2 years younger than him, was the child that the whole neighborhood mentioned with affection. He studied well, played soccer skillfully, and had a type of smile that made adults burst into laughter along with him, no matter what they were frustrated about. Malcolm dreamed of becoming an aeronautical engineer, and he filled his notebooks with airplane models he thought up himself. But the year Malcolm was 12, headaches began to appear, then unusual nosebleeds. The doctor at the nearby clinic diagnosed it as lack of sleep due to studying. Only when he fainted right in the classroom did the family take him to the emergency room, where Xavier's mother herself worked. The tumor had spread too widely to intervene. Malcolm passed away less than 4 months later, when Xavier was only 14 years old. He still remembered vividly the night, standing in the hospital corridor, looking down at the tiled floor that his father had mopped over and over for nearly 30 years, and wondering why no one discovered it earlier. That question followed him throughout the years after, smoldering like a not fully healed burn. At the age of 18, instead of choosing the path of going to college immediately, like his classmates, Xavier joined the military, not because of a thirst for battle, but because it was the only way for him to have a chance to study higher without pushing his parents into debt. 4 years of service, deployed overseas twice, and a long scar on his left shoulder that he had never told the details to anyone, including his daughter later on. Upon returning, he used the tuition assistance program for veterans to study biotechnology at a prestigious technical school. He studied day and night, graduated at the top of his field, then rented a small garage in the suburbs as a starting place, a folding table, a bought-back old centrifuge, and a single goal pursuing him for many consecutive years. That was to find a method to early diagnose diseases that medicine had once missed, like how people had missed Malcolm. That garage gradually became the Bennett Diagnostics Company, up to the present. The company has listed on the National Stock Exchange, capitalization value exceeding $4 billion. With nearly 300 employees and dozens of diagnostic devices being used at hospitals in more than 20 countries, Xavier built everything with his own hands, brain, and the name of his younger brother deeply engraved in his heart. 2 years ago, his wife, Renata, passed away suddenly because of a brain hemorrhage right in their home kitchen. She was a literature professor, always sitting grading papers at the table near the window every evening. After the funeral, Xavier could not step into that kitchen one more time. He sold the old house, moved to another city with his daughter, bringing along his only remaining little girl, Zora. Zora Bennett, 18 years old, is the girl currently standing frozen in the canteen right now, the one who was just called by a strange woman with words that made the whole room fall dead silent. Zora was admitted to Ashford University entirely by her own ability. Her scores were in the leading group of the National Standardized Exam, and she once had a research paper on gene therapy, published even before graduating from high school. She deserved her position, every single centimeter of it. But she also kept in her heart a thing that no one in the school knew. Her father was one of the biggest donors of the school. The charitable fund bearing his family's name had negotiated with the board of directors for many months about a $12 million grant dedicated to building a new research center named after her mother. Zora did not want anyone to know about this matter. She wanted to prove to herself that she belonged to this place, not relying on the family name, not relying on the charitable fund, not relying on any financial safety net. Because of that, she kept silent, even when Diane Kowalski began targeting her from the first week of enrollment. She kept silent when that matter repeated in the second week, the third week, and every week after that. She had never told her father to hear, not because of fear, but because she did not want him to think she was weak. She was afraid that if she reported this matter, people would say she was overreacting because she was the daughter of a billionaire. Because of that, she swallowed it down, week after week, alone. That morning, Xavier's private helicopter landed at the school's small airport at 7:15. Before 8 o'clock, he was already sitting in the mahogany-paneled meeting room on the third floor of the administration building, shaking hands with each member of the board of directors. The morning meeting went smoothly. The numbers were approved. The architectural blueprint received praise. The grant was almost completed. Everyone smiled. Everyone shook hands with each other again. Diane Kowalski had managed the food court of Ashford University for nearly 20 years. In all that time, she built for herself a small but solid kind of power, a power that did not lie in any official document, but yet dictated how thousands of students experienced their meals every day. There was no school document that stipulated dividing the serving counters according to any criteria other than arriving first or arriving later. But in her own way, Diane had created an underground order that she called in her head a rational arrangement system. The students whom she felt belonged to this place, usually familiar faces from prominent families in the area, were always served at the main counter, quickly and politely. As for other students, especially newly enrolled students of color, they were often pushed by her to a corner of the auxiliary counter, where the food was colder and the portions were smaller, under the vague excuse of checking meal cards or verifying scholarship status. No one in the school's management board had ever questioned her about this seriously, partly because Diane always knew how to present everything as if it were a normal operating procedure. Another part, more sadly, because the rare complaints from students or parents were often put into a drawer and forgotten. No one bothered to follow through to the end. For many years, she had learned how to read who was the person that could be bullied by her without having to pay a price. She looked at how a student dressed, how they spoke, how they reacted when oppressed, to decide the level she could push forward. With students who were silent, enduring, she gained even more momentum to push deeper. Zora fell exactly into that group, right from the first day. She was always polite, always yielding, never loudly resisting, even though being treated unfairly. To Diane, that calmness was not dignity, but a sign of a person easily subdued. for 3 consecutive weeks. Diane found all kinds of reasons to delay Zora's portion, from requesting to recheck her student card to complaining that she stood in the wrong line. Every time like that, a few surrounding students noticed the abnormality, but the majority chose to look elsewhere, because speaking up meant becoming the next target. The kitchen staff team working under Diane's authority also understood this clearly. They saw everything, but their work schedules, hours, and final evaluations all lay in her hands. Their silence did not come from indifference, but from the fear of losing the jobs that were feeding their families. That morning, Zora stepped into the waiting line like every day, the plastic tray held firmly in her 2 hands, her eyes looking straight towards the hot food counter that was steaming profusely. Diane stood behind the counter, her hands wearing rubber gloves, looking at her, walking over, her gaze starting to scrutinize from her shoes up to the white shirt she was wearing. "Stop." Diane raised her hand, blocking across, before Zora could put the tray down on the metal slide. "Where is the student card?" Zora pulled the card from her jeans pocket, holding it out without a word of complaint, even though this was already the 4th time suit the week. She was asked for this while other students only needed to step past without anyone asking. Diane took the card, not looking at it at all, just glancing over Zora from head to toe, then throwing the card back onto the stainless steel counter surface. "You stood in the wrong line. This area is reserved for students who have fully paid tuition." Her voice raised high, enough for the surrounding people to turn their heads back to look. "I have fully paid tuition, Miss Kowalski." Zora kept her voice calm, but her hands gripped tightly around the edge of the tray until pale white. "Fully paid." Diane burst out laughing, a dry laugh not containing any bit of humor. "How could your kind of person have money to fully pay tuition here?" She stepped around out of the counter, approaching closely, the smell of coffee lingering in her breath. "This food is not for you." The soup spoon in her hand swung up, pointing directly at Zora's face, and in that motion, a thick tomato sauce streak splashed out of the spoon's hollow, spreading on the shoulder of her white shirt into a dark red streak, exactly like a newly slashed wound. The entire queuing area stopped short. Whispering sounds arose behind, the sounds of several phones being pulled out of pants pockets. A male student standing nearby slightly shifted his body forward, as if wanting to intervene, but Zora gently shook her head at him, a small gesture enough to say "don't." Zora did not reply. She stood still, 2 hands still tightly holding the empty tray, her gaze looking straight at Diane without avoiding at all, even though something in her chest was tightening beat by beat. "Get out of my line," Diane stressed her voice, pointing her finger towards the end of the canteen. "Go to the other area and stand. This place is not your place." Behind the counter, 2 kitchen staff stood silently, eyes looking down at the tiled floor, no one daring to speak up. That was the reflex of people who had witnessed this scene too many times and learned that silence was the only way to keep their jobs. At several tables nearby, the sounds of knives and forks stopped completely. A blonde girl, perhaps Zora's roommate, brought her hand up to cover her mouth, eyes opened wide, not believing in what she had just witnessed. And right amidst that moment, the canteen almost held its breath. The glass door behind Zora's back burst open. The man stepped through the glass door frame, his gait slow but steady, leather shoes tapping lightly on the polished tile floor. He had not said anything yet, just standing there for a beat, his eyes glued to the red streak spreading on the white shirt, shoulder of the girl, standing in the middle of the line of people. No one in the canteen recognized who he was, with the majority of students gluing their eyes to their phones. He was just a strange guest wearing a suit, perhaps a parent or a board member visiting the school. Zora, standing with her back turned towards the door, was still bracing herself to keep balance in the dizziness that had just risen after Diane's sentence, 2 hands tightly gripping the tray. And in that short moment, the memories of 3 weeks ago suddenly rushed back into her head, fast and overwhelmingly, as if that whole period of time had just glided past in only one breath. The first day she set foot in this canteen, everything was still strange and new. She brought along both the eagerness of a freshman who had just left her family for the first time, along with the silent determination that she would not let anyone know she was the daughter of Xavier Bennett. She wanted to be recognized for her own self, for the transcript she won with her own hands, for the research paper she wrote by herself, and not for the name attached to a charitable fund of tens of millions of dollars. The first time Diane laid eyes on her was on the Tuesday noon of the first school week. At that time, she simply requested to recheck the student card, with the reason that the scanner encountered a malfunction. Zora did not think much about that matter. She stood waiting for a few more minutes, only to be served a meal colder than the people lining up before and after her. Coming to the second week, that matter repeated, but this time accompanied by a casual remark about the fact that some students should be grateful for being able to sit and eat here. Zora did not react. She thought perhaps that was just a bad day of a woman standing behind the counter, a momentary irritation that would pass. Also in that second week, she once quietly dropped by the Student Affairs office, asking for a copy of the Dining Regulations Handbook, just to verify for herself whether there was any regulation allowing the division of serving areas or not. There was none. She kept that to herself, not reporting, not making a fuss, just putting it away like a silent piece of evidence. But coming to the third week, she realized this was not a random matter. She noticed that Diane always looked at the serving counter with an invisible kind of categorization, her gaze gliding past each face before deciding who got served fast, who had to wait, who got pushed to the hidden corner. She was not the only person. She realized some other students of class also had to stand lingering longer than normal, also getting asked questions no one else was asked. There was one evening, her roommate, Sophia, sitting next to her on the bunk bed, asked directly if there was anything happening in the canteen, because she noticed that Zora increasingly ate lunch there less. Zora only smiled, saying that she was busy studying, that she was more used to eating light snacks in the library. That was not the truth. But she was not yet ready to speak the truth out. She also did not tell her father to hear. Even though every weekend call, he still always asked if she was okay, if she needed anything. Every time like that, she only replied briefly that everything was fine, that she was adapting well to the new environment. She was afraid that if she told it out, he would think she was not strong enough to stand firm by herself. She was also afraid, even though she did not want to admit it, that if this news spread out, people would look at her like a pampered little miss, who was overreacting to a trivial matter. So she chose the way of enduring. Every time being requested to stand back, she stepped back. Every time being asked unreasonable questions about the student card, she pulled the card out without a word of complaint. Every time receiving a meal colder, smaller, she still sat down and ate her whole portion, because she did not want to reveal that those trivial matters were eroding her day by day. There was one noon. She stood next to Andre Ellison, a sophomore on scholarship, who was also frequently targeted by Diane. He said to her, voice small enough for only the two of them to hear, that she called this matter arranging order, and no one in the management board had ever questioned that. He said he once tried reporting to the Student Affairs office one time, but his letter of complaint disappeared without a trace, as if it had never been submitted. That story, Zora realized more clearly that this was not her own matter. This was a pattern that had existed for a long time, silently operating under the cover of a normal procedure, and no one was courageous enough or powerful enough to break it. But there were nights when the room lights were off and Sophia was sound asleep. Zora lay looking up at the ceiling and felt a tiredness creeping into every muscle fiber, the kind of tiredness that did not come from schoolwork, but came from having to brace herself to maintain composure every day. All of those things glided past her mind in only a few short seconds. Her shirt shoulder was still wet with the red sauce streak. Her fingers gripped tighter around the edge of the plastic tray, to the point the finger joints went pale white. Behind her back, the sounds of leather shoes continued to ring out on the tiled floor, slowly, steadily. Every step, one bit closer towards the serving counter, where Diane was still standing, the soup spoon still raised suspended in the air. Her mouth opened wide to continue the still unfinished sentence. The sound of leather shoes stopped about 1 meter away from the serving counter. Xavier stood there, 2 hands hanging loose by his sides, his gaze sweeping across the entire scene in front of him for a few seconds, long enough for him to see everything that needed to be seen. Half an hour ago, the meeting ended earlier than expected. Instead of following the board to the faculty dining room, he turned down 2 flights of stairs, followed by 2 school security guards. He did not notify Zora in advance, only wanting to sit opposite his daughter, like a normal father in exactly these scarce 15 minutes of break. When the glass door opened in front of him, the first sentence he heard was a woman's voice stressing with full contempt, and the next sentence made his feet stop short mid-step. Now, standing 1 meter away from the serving counter, he saw the entire picture clearly. The woman standing behind the counter, the soup spoon still raised in her hand, her face flushing red because of the unsoothed anger, and his daughter, standing with her back turned towards him, her shirt shoulder spreading a dark red streak, 2 hands tightly gripping the tray, as if it were the only thing keeping her standing firm. He realized that shirt streak was not sauce accidentally spilled out. He realized the way his daughter stood, the way she did not turn her head back at all, the way the whole canteen suddenly sank into silence. There was something in this scene that made his entire body tense up, a reflex that he once learned from his years in the military, when instinct recognized danger faster than even reason. Behind him, the 2 security guards also stopped short, not yet understanding what was happening, only knowing that the man they were escorting suddenly stood motionless in the middle of the walkway. "Get out of my line." Diane's voice still had not ended. She had not yet realized someone had just stepped in. "Go to the other area and stand." Xavier took another step, slowly, purposely. He cast his eyes to look around the room one more time before approaching closer. On the left side, a long line of students stood along the serving counter. The majority had stopped eating, eyes glued towards the counter. A few people had pulled their phones out, screens lighting up in their hands. There was a tall young man, wearing a hoodie printed with the school's track and field team logo, standing near the front of the line, making a move to step forward as if wanting to intervene, but stopped when seeing Zora gently shake her head towards him. Behind the counter, 2 kitchen staff stood still like statues, eyes looking down at the floor, not daring to look up. On the right side, several tables near the window had gone completely silent, knives and forks put down, unfinished conversations abruptly abandoned. A blonde girl brought her hand up to cover her mouth, eyes opened wide. And right amidst everything, Diane Kowalski stood there, 2 hands resting on her hips, chin raised high, looking at Zora with the gaze of a person who had just cleaned a stain off their shirt. Xavier stepped forward, placed his hand on his daughter's shoulder, gently, as if to tell her that she no longer had to stand alone. Zora, startled, turned sharply around, eyes opened wide upon realizing the person who had just touched her shoulder. "Dad, what are you doing here?" Her voice faltered a bit, not because of surprise, but because of a feeling of shame that suddenly rose up, the kind of feeling of a person who had just been caught amidst the thing she had tried to keep hidden for many weeks. Xavier looked at his daughter for a long time, not answering her question immediately. He turned his head towards Diane, his gaze calm but not avoiding at all. "Excuse me, I am her father." His voice was even, not loud, without a bit of anger revealing on the surface. "I want to understand what is happening here." Diane stopped short for a moment, cast her eyes to look at him from top to bottom. She saw a suit without a tie, without a designer watch, without an entourage coming along besides the 2 security guards wearing school uniforms. Not a single sign of power that she had ever learned how to identify. She gripped tightly her hand around the spoon handle, her lower jaw clenching, then took another half step towards him, her voice starting to raise high again. "Parents and guests are not allowed into the serving area. I did not come here with the status of a visiting guest." Xavier kept his original position, his voice not changing volume at all. I only want to understand why my daughter is standing here with a sauce streak on her shirt, and no one in this counter is willing to serve her. Diane tightly gripped her hand around the spoon handle, to the point her knuckles turned white. She looked around, realizing the gaze of the whole canteen was pouring towards her side, and instead of stepping back, she chose the way of pushing her voice even higher, as if volume could substitute for reason. I do not owe you any explanation. If you have questions about your daughter's financial status, the financial aid office is located in the administration building, second floor. They open at 8 o'clock. I did not come here because of financial matters, Xavier replied, his gaze not leaving her for a single second. I came here because of the way you just talked to my child. Diane removed her hands from her hips, placing both palms down on the stainless steel counter surface, her body leaning forward. The fluorescent light on the ceiling made a soft buzzing sound like a trapped insect. I do not like this tone of yours, she said, intentionally louder than necessary, as if acting for the surrounding people to hear, and not just speaking to him privately. We have rules here, have a system, perhaps in the places you frequently hang around. People can barge in demanding whatever they want, but this is Ashford University. She paused, letting the name of the school hang, suspended in the air like something sacred that could not be touched. I have worked here for 19 years. I advise you to lower your voice, take your daughter out of here, and exit by the side door, as quietly as possible. Xavier did not lower his voice, nor raise it higher. I want to know your name and title. Excuse me, your name and title. I am filing a formal complaint. The corner of Diane's left eye twitched slightly, the first crack on the fake calm shell she tried to maintain. I have no obligation to provide anything to you. Then I want to meet your direct supervisor. Diane let out a short, dry laugh, like a broken tree branch. Honey, I am the supervisor here. I have managed this entire food court for 19 years. And in all those 19 years, no one has ever stepped into my canteen and talked to me in this manner. She leaned her body closer, close enough for Xavier to smell the coffee in her breath. Now I will ask one last time. Leave here, or I will have someone take you out. Xavier did not budge. I want my daughter to receive the hot meal portion that my family has fully paid for. Full package tuition, full package meal portion, no scholarship, no financial aid, fully paid. And I want that meal portion to be served right at this counter. The counter that every other student is being served at. Diane glared at him. Her nose wings flared. Her jaw clenched tight. The canteen was so silent that one could clearly hear the sound of the ice maker running in the back room. Then, she reached her hand down under the counter, pressed a button. A walkie-talkie turned on with a crackling sound. Security. This is Kowalski at the food court. I have a strange man in the serving area. He has a provocative attitude and refuses to leave. I need assistance immediately. She put the walkie-talkie down, looking straight at Xavier, the corner of her mouth smirking up. Let's see how you manage with this matter. Half a minute later, the side door burst open. A female school security guard stepped in, around 40 years old. Neat uniform, walkie-talkie attached at her hip. She cast her eyes sweeping quickly across the room, stopping at Zora standing stiffly, at Xavier with two hands clearly exposed at both sides, at Diane standing behind the counter with crossed arms. She had done this job for 11 years. She had handled noisy incidents in the dormitories, parking space disputes, the times students got locked out of their rooms. She had never had to pull out her stun gun even once. She had a very good instinct for reading and understanding situations, and right now, this room was not at all exactly like what was being reported. But Diane had approached close to her, whispering fast, loud enough for Xavier to still hear every fragment. Not an unregistered parent. Barged in here. Aggressive behavior. I felt threatened. Not even sure if he is the girl's father or not. The female security guard turned to Xavier. Sir, may I see your identification papers? Xavier put his hand into his inner suit pocket, slowly, purposely, following exactly the way black men in this country learned to move in front of anyone wearing a uniform. He pulled out his driver's license, handing it to her without saying an extra word. She checked, called to report via walkie-talkie. The received answer was clean. No criminal record, no arrest warrant, not even a single parking ticket. He is clean, she said, half as if reminding herself. Diane immediately shook her head. That proves nothing. Anyone can carry fake papers. Look at him. Does he look like someone who belongs to this place? She pointed her finger towards the leather briefcase hanging on Xavier's shoulder. I want his briefcase to be checked. I saw him reach his hand across the counter just now. He might have taken something away. The female security guard turned to Xavier, her facial expression clearly revealing awkwardness. Her hand placed on the walkie-talkie and not the stun gun. That was a good sign. But her mouth still had to speak out, the thing Diane wanted to hear. Sir, would you mind if I took a look through your briefcase? The whole canteen held its breath. Xavier looked at the female security guard, then looked at Diane, then looked at dozens of phones being raised to record video from all corners of the room. No, he said, I do not agree to a search. No reasonable grounds. No search warrant. This is my personal property. Every word was set down clearly, firmly, like every brick stacked upon each other. The female security guard nodded. Legally speaking, she could not force that matter. She knew that clearly. Xavier also knew that clearly. But Diane did not care about the law. She only cared about gaining the winning part. She stepped around the head of the counter, walked straight forward, snatched the leather briefcase off Xavier's shoulder, strong enough that the strap cut a stinging line across his collarbone. Do not touch him, Zora shouted, stepping forward one step. Kowalski. Wait a minute. The female security guard reached her hand out, but it was too late. Diane placed the briefcase on the counter, unzipped it wide open, the unzipping sound tearing through the canteen like a scream. She began pulling every item out, slamming it hard down onto the stainless steel surface for the whole room to see. A silver laptop. She just glanced over, then pushed aside. A dark brown leather document folder, stamped with gold letters on the front. The line of words Bennett Diagnostics appearing clearly, but she did not bother to read. A heavy bronze military badge. She flipped it back and forth, like flipping a bottle cap, then threw it back onto the counter. The sound of metal hitting steel rang out ear-piercingly. Zora Stories. Sophia, having just run over from somewhere in the crowd, brought her hand up, hugging her mouth. A thick bound stack of documents, about 50 pages. The line of words on the cover read clearly. Grant Agreement. Renata Bennett Research Center, Ashford University. $12,500,000. Diane flipped through 3 pages, not reading a single word, then threw it back as if it were a worthless advertising flyer. There is nothing here, she declared, her voice echoing across the room, full of a theatrical look. But that does not mean I trust him. She wiped her 2 hands on her apron, the exact same gesture she had done upon Zora earlier, as if touching anything belonging to a person of color needed to be cleansed. Xavier looked down at the military badge, lying scattered next to a ketchup bottle and a stack of paper napkins. The badge he once carried in his pocket, the day Malcolm passed away, the day Zora was born, the day he stood before Renata's coffin. He slowly bent down, picked it up, placed it back into his suit pocket. Only his hand was slightly trembling. He did not say anything, but in his head, a thought flashed clearly like lightning. He could absolutely withdraw the entire grant right here, right now, with just one call. He could make the entire administration building shake in just half an hour, could wipe out the research centrifuge bearing Fife's name from the school's blueprint as an immediate punishment for everything that had just happened. But he also knew such a decision would punish the wrong people. There would be hundreds of other students, people who had never done anything wrong, having to bear the consequences from his anger. What he needed was not to destroy an entire educational institution. What he needed was exactly one person having to take responsibility at the right time, at the right place, in front of the very people who had witnessed the entire incident. He pulled his phone out from his pants pocket, quickly typed 2 consecutive messages, The first message sent to Catalina Reyes, the chief lawyer of the corporation. He messaged her to pause all contracts currently associating with Ashford University across the entire investment portfolio, including the grant from the Family Charitable Fund, effective immediately. The second message sent to the school's dean, just a mere single line, requesting him to come down immediately to the student canteen. Right at the moment, Xavier pressed the send button. Diane turned to the female security guard, her voice raising high again, hand pointing straight towards Zora, standing frozen beside her father. As for you, she stressed her voice, the finger wearing the rubber glove, pointing straight at Zora's chest. Sit down, Diane repeated, her voice sharp as a cutting knife. Adults are handling this matter. You should be grateful that this school still allows you to sit in this room. Zora did not sit down. She stood up straight, her shoulder still spreading the red streak, but her gaze did not waver at all. There is no regulation dividing students by lines at all. Ms. Kowalski, she said, her voice not loud but enough to echo to every corner of the canteen. I went up to the Student Affairs office in the second week, asking for a copy of the Dining Regulations Handbook to verify for myself. There is absolutely no Zone A. There is absolutely no Zone B. You set that out yourself, and you use it to humiliate every student of color stepping through this door. Whispering sounds arose throughout the canteen, not clapping sounds, but heavy breathing sounds, the sounds of chairs rubbing when several people sprang to their feet. A girl at a corner table burst into tears out loud. The young man wearing the track and field team hoodie raised his phone higher, ensuring the recording angle did not miss a single frame. Diane cast her eyes looking around, searching for an ally. She looked towards the two kitchen staff. They bowed their faces down to the floor. She looked at the female security guard. She turned away, not responding to her gaze. She looked towards the door, where the school's dean had just appeared, his hand still holding the piece of paper, printing the message he just read on the way down, his face pale white as if having just seen a traffic accident. Preston Adler stepped in, his navy blue suit still neatly buttoned from the morning meeting, but his footsteps were staggering, no longer having the confident appearance of a few hours ago. He cast his eyes looking throughout the canteen, looking at Xavier standing there with the red indented mark on his collar, looking at Zora with the sauce streak spreading on her shoulder, looking at dozens of phone lenses being pointed towards the serving counter. Oh my God, he whispered, enough for the people standing nearby to hear. What has happened here? The female security guard spoke up first, her voice brief, only stating the events. The canteen manager had refused to serve a student. The father of that student had intervened. The manager called security, accused him of illegal trespassing, then personally snatched his personal property to search publicly in front of all the students present. The father had fully cooperated throughout the process. The manager did not. Preston heard everything, his face turning more and more pale. He turned to Xavier, and, for the first time since stepping into the room, he truly looked straight at him, not looking at the suit, not looking at the guest badge pinned on the lapel, but looking at the very persons standing in front of him. Mr. Bennett, Preston said, choosing every word as if stepping through a minefield. I want you to know that what just happened in this canteen absolutely does not represent this school. Xavier looked straight at him, not avoiding. 3 hours ago, you sat in the same meeting room with me. You shook my hand. You called me the most important strategic partner of the school. You showed me the blueprint of a building that will bear the name of my late wife. He paused for a beat. And while you were pouring coffee inviting me on the 3rd floor, your employee stood down here, telling my daughter that she should be grateful for being able to sit and eat in the school's canteen. Preston opened his mouth, unable to utter a single word. Zora spoke up, her voice small but clear. Dear Dean Adler, this is not the first time. She does this matter every week. She sets out a system herself, called arranging order. Black students get pushed to the auxiliary area. White students still stand originally in the main line. There is no regulation of the school allowing that. She thought it up herself, and no one stopped her. The crowd buzzed again, this time louder. The sounds of several people saying in unison, "That's right," rang out from behind. A girl at a corner table was still crying, but now they were different tears. The kind of tears of a person who had just gotten to hear the thing she once thought was only her own imagination. Diane looked around, finding some point of reliance, but there was no one left standing on her side anymore. The kitchen staff did not look at her. The female security guard did not look at her. Preston was holding the piece of paper in his hand, reading it again, as if reading an official document would bring him a bit of bravery that he did not have readily available. "Miss Kowalski," Preston said, his voice hardening every single word, as if trying to stand firm on his own 2 feet. "Starting from this minute, you are suspended from the position of Food Service Director, effective immediately, with pay during the time waiting for a comprehensive investigation into your behavior. You must leave the school campus within the next 1 hour. The security guard will escort you out." Diane's mouth mumbled but did not emit any sound. She brought 2 trembling hands to untie the apron strings, folded it up, placed it on the counter surface, slowly as if folding a flag in a funeral ceremony. "Mr. Bennett," she said, her voice choked up, intermittent as if being pulled out from a sewer drain. "I did not know who you were. If I knew, I would never." Xavier cut across, not loudly, only decisively. "That is exactly the problem. You should not need to know who I am to treat my daughter like a human being." Diane stood silently, her hand still holding the neatly folded apron, her eyes beginning to turn red. The female security guard stepped forward, placed her hand on her arm, gently tilted her head, signaling towards the side door. Diane walked away, her legs trembling, not looking back behind, passing by the line of kitchen staff who used to work under her authority for many years. No one among them raised their heads up to look at her leaving. Preston Adler stood in the middle of the canteen, his hand still holding the already crumpled piece of paper, his gaze gliding past every face of the students surrounding, every phone still raised high recording this moment. He cleared his throat, trying to regain a bit of the remaining majesty of a person heading a prestigious educational institution. "I will ensure a full investigation is conducted," he said, his voice still trembling. That afternoon, Catalina Reyes was present at the school within less than 2 hours, bringing along a specialized data team and an order requesting the provision of official records. She did not need to ask for anyone's permission. Her team began collecting all security camera footage of the food court in the most recent 120 days, the full personnel record of Diane Kowalski, every letter of complaint ever submitted by students or parents in the past 8 years, and the entire data of the school's meal card system. What they found made even Xavier, the person who originally had prepared his spirit ready for the worst, also have to stay silent for a long time. In 8 years, 17 students of color and their families had submitted formal letters of complaint about Diane Kowalski's behavioral manner. 14 letters among those were put into a drawer by the old management board. Stamped received, then fell into oblivion. The remaining 3 families did not receive any response at all. 6 students had transferred schools. In their application to drop out, they wrote the reason: a hostile dining environment. Not a single person in the management board had ever called back to ask why. But the meal card data was even worse. Diane had personally adjusted the system 26 times in 3 years, downgrading the meal, portions of students of color, and Latin American descent down to the scholarship category, even though all had fully paid the full package tuition. Not a single white student had ever been adjusted in a similar manner. That pattern was clear and consistent to the point of looking like an official policy, even though there had never been any document stipulating that matter. Zora's card had been marked right from the 3rd day she enrolled. To Xavier, that number was no longer abstract data anymore. That was the image of his daughter standing in the line, hands tightly gripping the meal tray, week after week, alone. The central focus that he kept throughout the days after that was not the scandal itself or the legal process. He thought more about the fact that his daughter had to carry that burden alone for many weeks, about the fact that she had chosen to stay silent for fear of being thought of as weak, for fear that the family name would overshadow what she had achieved by herself. That evening, when both sat in the hotel room near the school, Zora leaned her head on his shoulder, her voice going small. "I did not want you to think I was not strong enough to handle everything by myself." Wrapped his arms, embracing his daughter. "You do not need to be strong alone, Zora. That is not the thing I want you to learn." A few weeks after that, the school organized a general student meeting, live-streamed directly. Preston Adler stood on the podium, publicly apologizing, admitting that the previous letters of complaint had not been processed adequately. He stood up from the speaking podium, his hand still tightly gripping the already crumpled piece of paper. Stepped down to the front row of seats, where Zora and Xavier were sitting, his mouth just opening, intending to say something more. 6 months later, the canteen of Ashford University was no longer the same as before. The wall behind the serving counter was now hung full of paintings and photographs taken by the students themselves, reflecting all kinds of cultures coexisting on the school campus. A large sign hung right at the entrance, the handwritten words standing out: "Every seat here belongs to everyone." There was no longer any auxiliary counter called Zone B. There was no longer anyone being requested to stand back for unclear reasons. The old kitchen team had almost changed completely. The new person in charge, a woman named Camila Ortiz, recruited from outside the school, brought along a completely different working philosophy. In the first week of taking the job, she had remembered the names of all the students working part-time at the canteen. She initiated a new program called Family Lunch, organized on Friday every month, where parents were invited to come eat with their children, sitting at the same table, not distinguishing who came from where. The school also established a new equity and inclusion office, with 3 full-time staff in charge of receiving and processing every complaint in a transparent manner. All staff on the school campus, from faculty members to service staff, all had to complete a mandatory training course on bias awareness. Preston Adler personally rewrote the entire Code of Conduct handbook for school staff, adding specific clauses that had never existed before. Zora, along with a few friends, established a program named Open Table, connecting freshmen, especially students of color and first-generation college students in their families, with upperclassmen ready to guide them on everything, from how to operate the meal card system to how to submit a letter of complaint if anything went wrong. By the end of the first semester, the program had 62 guides participating. The charitable fund bearing the name Renata Bennett also completed a new grant agreement with terms entirely different from the beginning, the value raised to $18 million. In which a large part was dedicated exclusively to 50 full scholarships granted to students of color coming from public schools in the area. The scholarship was named Renata Bennett, the Belonging Scholarship, and was maintained permanently through every school year. Andre Ellison, the student who once told Zora to hear about his forgotten letter of complaint that year, now became one of the first advisors of the new program. He stood at the canteen door on the first day of the semester, welcoming the newly arrived freshmen, in his hand, holding ready a tray that had been filled with food, placing it right in front of the table near the window for them. On a Friday afternoon in October, Xavier stood at the end of the canteen, observing the scene in front of his eyes. The same old tiled floor, the same row of fluorescent lights on the ceiling, but everything else had changed. The sound in the room was entirely different. The atmosphere in the room was entirely different. Even the faces standing behind the serving counter were entirely different. Zora sat in the middle of the room, gathering together with a group of friends of all skin colors, all backgrounds, arguing enthusiastically about a biochemistry assignment. Laughter ringing out to the point someone accidentally knocked over a whole carton of orange juice onto the table. Zora quick-handedly grabbed a paper napkin, wiping clean the water streak without stumbling over a single beat in the story she was telling halfway. Camila Ortiz stepped over to Xavier's place, blossoming a smile. Mr. Bennett, do you want to line up with us in today's family lunch? Today there is a grilled chicken dish. Xavier smiled, taking hold of a tray, standing into the line like any other parent, taking his meal portion with his own hands, at the corner of the serving counter, where the soup spoon that Diane often used to point into students' faces was once placed. Now there was only success nameplate engraved with a simple line of words, recording the name of the new person in charge of the food court, along with the slogan of the new program placed right underneath. Xavier put the meal tray down on the table, pulling a chair to sit opposite Zora. She pushed her salad portion towards him, smiled, then turned back to continue the unfinished argument about the biochemistry assignment with her group of friends, her voice blending into the familiar, noisy sound of lunch hour. There is one thing I keep thinking about forever after learning the story of Xavier and Zora. Dignity is not a thing people have to earn by proving how much money they have, where they were born, or who they know. It inherently belongs to each person right from the beginning. Only that there are places, there are people who still stubbornly strip that away from others because of a prejudice they carry throughout their entire lives. The thing that torments me the most is not the behavior of Diane Kowalski. People like her are not rare. The thing that torments me even more is the 17 letters of complaint that were once cast aside throughout 8 years. Is the 6 students who silently left the school without anyone bothering to ask the true reason. A flawed system does not need a cruel person standing at the head to exist. It only needs very many good people choosing the way of silence. Zora had stayed silent throughout 3 weeks, not because she was weak, but because she carried along a very human fear, fear of being perceived wrongly, fear of being thought of as overreacting. How many people among us have also once stayed silent like that, not because of not realizing the wrong thing, but because of not being sure whether speaking up is worth it or not? So I want to ask you one thing. If that day you were the person standing in line right behind Zora, seeing the entire matter happening in front of your eyes, what would you do? Would you raise your phone up to record as evidence, step out to speak up, or choose the way of looking down at your meal tray and pretending like there was no matter? I truly want to hear your answer in the comment section below. It does not need to be any grand story. Just needs to be the thing you truly think, or even a time in your life you once stood in that position, whether as the person speaking up or the person who once stayed silent, then regretted. Thank you for taking the time to listen to the end of this story with me. See you again in the next story.